Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Charles Feddersen. I'm the Director of Product Management at Microsoft, responsible for Postgres. My third time in India, my first time in Bangalore, my first time actually in India in about 14 years. It's great to be back. Thank you again for being here. Thank you as well to the organizers for putting the conference together. I've played a small role in putting a few conferences together over the years. I know how much work it is. I can completely relate to putting badges out at midnight the night before. But I think everyone would agree that it's come together spectacularly. I think the next couple of days are going to be fantastic. I want to talk about a couple of things today with what we're doing at Microsoft with respect to Postgres. Microsoft has been in the database game for a long time. And it's no news to me that when you think about databases that Microsoft work on, Postgres is probably not the one that comes to your mind first. Microsoft has a long history in building OLTP databases, analytical databases, databases optimized for log analytics, NoSQL databases. We worked on Hadoop in the cloud for a while as well. But we've also deeply invested in Postgres. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in this space, both with respect to our open source contributions and also the managed services that we run in Azure today. Now, last year in about August, we wrote a blog. And this blog really detailed everything that we were doing at Microsoft. And we got a ton of really good feedback on this blog. It was read thousands of times. It's a pretty thick read, so you need a fair bit of time to get through it. But we've decided to start publishing this twice a year. It's a great vehicle for us to share with the community everything that we're doing, both in open source Postgres and in the cloud. The team actually blogs pretty feverishly. We get things out at least a few times a month with respect to Azure and open source as well. The next edition of this is going to come out in, I think we're targeting about April this year. I believe that it's already underway. It does take a little bit of time, but I encourage you to read it, and I'm sure we'll do everything we can to promote it. But what was really nice about this was that it was the first time that we were able to articulate everything that we're doing in one place. And that's why we want to continue to do it, because it's really important to be able to share what we're doing in the community and how you can benefit from what we're shipping in Postgres. And again, that's either in the cloud or in the pure open source variant. I'll talk a little bit about the managed service first and what we're doing there, and then I'll talk a little bit after that about open source. When we think about building managed services in support of Postgres, I really identify with two distinct cohorts of customers. These are not distinct cohorts, there's overlap, but they really reflect where these projects are starting from. When I talk to enterprises, companies, not necessarily large companies, but companies that could be migrating Postgres workloads to the cloud, right? Or just simply evaluating managed services because they want to adopt this into their organization for building new applications, they want to talk to me about security. They want to talk to me about reliability and availability. They need a trusted platform that they can run mission-critical systems on and know it will be there day in and day out. If I talk to developers who are building new apps, they don't care about any of that. They probably should. And they will one day when it comes to deploy the app. What they want is cost-effective access to bits. They want access to the latest bits in the cloud. Developers want cool new stuff in the latest versions of Postgres, that they can try the latest features that the community is innovating in Postgres. And when they're building in the cloud in particular, they want great integrations with that cloud ecosystem. Postgres is a phenomenal database, but it can be even more powerful when it leverages capabilities within the cloud, whether that's fundamentals like cloud storage, or some of the more recent and awesomely innovative stuff that's happening in AI, where you can start to use some of the capabilities that Postgres was very fortunate to have a year ago in that PG vector extension, whose popularity just took off like crazy about 12 months ago for storing these embeddings and doing semantic searches in Postgres. They're the integrations they're looking for. And so we focus on both of these cohorts, knowing that they absolutely overlap. These new apps that you're building will be deployed and will need to be secure and highly available. And the people who are building these apps are developers. And so there is overlap, but we really think about these two separate sets of requirements. Now, last year, we put out a lot of capabilities into the managed service. Almost every month, we were pushing out new capabilities. And that ultimately culminated in November at our conference, which is Ignite, where we shipped the largest payload of features that we've ever pushed. But there are some things here around bringing new SKUs to market. We were able to bring Postgres 16 to market within about 6 weeks of the community launch. And that was significantly faster than we'd ever done it before because we knew this was important. We went back and reworked our engineering systems to be able to ship Postgres faster in the cloud because that's what the developer community was asking us for. If I expand upon what we did in November just a little bit, in addition to Postgres 16, we did some work around near-zero downtime scaling, which I'll talk about in a second. We brought a new Azure AI extension to market. We brought private endpoints, which was a really critical gap in our network security story. And we introduced a new GeoDR capability that enables you to initiate planned failovers across regions in the cloud with zero data loss. Now, if I expand upon some of these a little bit, the new premium SSD v2 disks in Azure are simply stunning with respect to their performance. When we contrast them to the existing v1 disks, they're about 4.5 times faster, twice the size, finer grained scaling, and offer up to 4x greater IOPS. When we paired these with Postgres, even we were a little surprised at the sheer performance that they produced. These are in preview right now, and we'll be bringing them into a generally available state later in the year. With near-zero downtime scaling, you can now change the server size that you're running for Flexible Server and with a downtime of about 20 seconds, which is typically highly tolerable for any application making connections with sufficient retry logic. We've got a few more things up our sleeves that we can bring this number down, but it's very consistent at this point, not as variable or as large a number as it used to be. With the geo-disaster recovery, you can now run multiple machines under a single virtual endpoint spread across multiple cloud regions. You can have an unplanned failover, or importantly, you can have a planned failover where you could switch the primary to replica. It'll drain the replication so that there's no data loss in that failover. The application doesn't need to change. It continues to operate under a common IP. And when you want, you can simply fail back as well, equally performantly. We found this was a driver for customers who actually, the primary driver was not the fact that it gave great DR, although it does. It was a compliance requirement. It was a requirement for them to be able to demonstrate multi-region disaster recovery on a quarterly basis. And so that was why we actually built the feature, but subsequently it's of course being used for implementing great multi-region DR. There is no limitation to the regional pairing. You can pair two regions on either side of the planet. You can pair two regions within the same country. And so you've got optionality about where you want to fail over to. It's not limited to the explicit Azure pairs that are defined. And then let's talk a little bit about PG Vector, this wonderful extension that's become so popular in the past year. PG Vector fundamentally provides 3 distinct capabilities. It enables you to take these long floating point-based vectors that are effectively numeric representations of text, store them in Postgres using a native vector type, index them, and then query them to determine the distance between them, which is how this sort of semantic search fundamentally works. It's a great capability for bringing or building these new Gen AI apps directly on Postgres. I would suggest that even though this capability will come to, I would argue, most, if not all, database systems in time, Postgres has a wonderful head start in the industry with respect to building new AI apps. But there is a problem. In this room, we have hundreds of people who are deep experts in writing SQL. It is probably the language of choice in this room. There's probably no greater point around here anywhere with a denser population of SQL developers. I spent a lot of my career writing SQL as well. It is my language of choice. There's a lot of things it can't do, but I like it when I can do as much with it as I possibly can. And so if I've got this ability to store, index, and query something, that's wonderful, but I can only do that after I've created it. And that was the fundamental gap. And so in November, we shipped the Azure AI extension. I'm going to walk you through exactly how that works. Imagine I've got a simple table here that's got some recipe data in it. I've got a product name, product description, product brand, common varchar data types. Very simple. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new column using the vector type. And this is where I want to store the embeddings for this text data. So how can I go ahead and do this? Well, in Flexible Server, you can create the extension Azure AI. you can then go ahead and configure this extension, setting the endpoint for the Azure OpenAI service, where you've got access to all sorts of capabilities, but specific to this, you've got access to embedding models, which through the underlying REST API call enables you to pass data from the database, get that embedding back, and store it locally in the type. Now, you could do this today already. How did you do this previously? You did everything at the application layer. Any of those existing applications, you needed to lift the data out of the database, you need to make the calls over to the service, bring those embedding back and put them in. This simplifies that. It gives you a different architectural option for building applications, either from scratch or enhancing existing ones. And so once I've configured it, then I can simply run a very simple SQL statement where I can update the data in that table, that null column that I had with vectors, and I can go and add embeddings directly in the table. Embeddings are large, by the way. This ADA model that we run in Azure OpenAI, each embedding is 6 kilobytes. Now, when you're talking about a database that stores things in 8 kilobyte pages, that starts to get pretty tricky. So I think it'll be an interesting area as to how we can start to handle embeddings more and more efficiently in databases that weren't necessarily considered for storing rows that are in excess of 6 kilobytes, although it can do it perfectly well. We'll see how that plays out. So now that I've created my embedding, this is fundamentally what's happening. I'm running my update statement. I'm passing that down to Azure OpenAI. Azure OpenAI runs it. The typical response time, give or take, is around about 50 to 60 milliseconds on an API call. So it does introduce a little bit of time. We're going outside the database. You need to think about how you want to architect the application if you're putting this on the critical path of inserting or modifying data in the database. And then when I come back, I've got my table, it's finished, I've got my embeddings on the right-hand side, and then I can use those operators that are within PG Vector as well for doing some semantic search or what have you across some of this data. Kicking off 2024, we are close. We're rolling out a few final regions right now in Spain and Mexico, which will put Flexible Server in 60 regions worldwide in Azure. It's pervasively available in effectively every Azure region, and we bring it online very quickly after Azure ships. This is a response to the demand that we see for Postgres. We've got a team that keeps pushing out these regions incredibly quickly. Coming up in March, PG Vector 0.6.0, which has already been released in the open source community, will ship in Flexible Server. We'll bring private endpoints to general availability, and the long-term backup retention will come to general availability as well. We have a huge year in front of us for Flexible Server. We aspire to continue to push features out every month. We run a blog. The team pushes out updates on a monthly basis, so I encourage you to keep an eye on that. And then we're looking forward to making announcements as we go throughout the year. Let's switch gears now to open source and what Microsoft does here, another area that you may not be fully familiar with. Microsoft actually has 5 committers on the team today. And in fact, when I gave this talk in PGConf Europe, or a version of it a few months ago, we only had 4. We added a 5th since then, and they're based in Japan, which is the green tick there. We have 9 contributors, and we're actively contributing back to both open source Postgres, the Postgres extension ecosystem, and the Postgres ecosystem on the whole. In Postgres 16 core, we did a few notable things. I should say we contributed a few notable things. Andres Freud did a lot of work in what has been a long-running and really substantial project around introducing asynchronous and direct I/O into Postgres. A lot of this is actually going to land in Postgres 17. And so we think about Postgres 16 as more laying some of the critical groundwork here. There were improvements made to copy, which resulted in about a 3x performance for the copy process in Postgres. PGStat.io provides really fantastic low-level insight into I/O operations in Postgres and enables an entirely new level of debugging effectively at that lower level. That was something that Melanie did a lot of work on. Order by distinct operators for performance and the parallel hash join. If I expand upon that a little bit, David Rowley, who's on our staff, wrote an awesome blog about, I'm going to say it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you'd like to really geek out on database performance, this is a great blog to go read. You can see the table of contents there. It's not purely a reflection of work that only Microsoft has done. There's a lot of people across different companies that have contributed to a lot of this work. But David put together a great blog, and it's a great read if you want to go see a lot of the capabilities that came into the core engine in Postgres 16. Beyond Postgres or core Postgres, there is the broader ecosystem. Microsoft acquired a company called Citus a number of years ago, and we've continued to invest heavily in Citus. We've also maintained a lot of those assets. The citusdata.com website, we maintain that. We continue to push content through there. Petroni, Alexander Kanishkin, who's actually at the conference this week. If you want to speak to him, he'll be at the Microsoft booth. Made a lot of investments in Petroni. PGCopyDB is a relatively new tool for moving data between instances. We actually use it extensively at Microsoft. A lot of the things we learned by running it at scale at Microsoft go back into open source PGCopyDB, and we take a lot of feedback from the community. It's a great cycle in enhancing that capability really quickly. And then Jelte Fenneman, who's actually also at the conference today, or this week I should say, has done made a lot of contributions to PG Bouncer as well. I want to talk a little bit about Citus and what it enables you to do. Citus fundamentally enables you to scale Postgres across a number of machines. It enables you to scale workloads out and spread and share that workload across machines relatively transparently. And when I say relatively transparently, I mean through a single endpoint, you can connect, execute your queries, and Citus will push that down. It will move data across nodes if it needs to resolve the query. But for some workloads, particularly where they scale out horizontally very nicely, where you've got great sharding keys to spread data, Citus is a really nice fit. It's open source. You can run on top of open source Postgres, or you can run it, of course, in Azure, as you would imagine. We've done a lot of work in Citus recently. Some of the interesting things that we've done are around the online rebalancing that enable you to grow the cluster and rebalance the data transparent to the app while it continues to run. And we made some enhancements for features specific to multi-tenancy. These multi-tenant apps where you've got effectively a tenant key enable you to scale this data out incredibly efficiently and scalably. And so we did some works there. In Citus 12, the hero feature was introducing what we call schema-based sharding. Consider a cluster of machines with a single logical database, a distributed database, if you will. And rather than using shard keys to spread data or replicate tables across the nodes, you can actually take the totality of a given schema and store it on a node. This provides greater compatibility where you can define more relationships across the tables. And Citus will still transparently route you to the node where that schema belongs. And you can move schemas around on nodes. You can put them on dedicated nodes depending on how busy, how large, or how the workload evolves over time. In Petroni, this is a really common feature. I was actually looking at the star history for each of these projects this morning. They continue to move up and to the right. It's great to see the community continue to embrace and use a lot of these capabilities. The latest version of Petroni that Alexander contributed to was 3.22, released in January. And customers are commonly using this for really things like high availability, cluster management, load balancing on open source Postgres. It could be in VMs, could be in your own data center. PGCopyDB is commonly used for migrations. We use it actually commonly for that today. It provides online and offline modes for moving data between instances of Postgres. And we've done a lot of work to optimize the scalability of it to make it more parallelized. There's been a ton of enhancements and fixes over the last 12 months. We will continue to make more. And it's, like I said, it's a really nice cycle for us. If you haven't had a look at it, take a look at it. It's available out of GitHub as well. I've put all of the URLs at the top there. But it's not all about code. Right? We are also deeply committed to what else we can do within the community. And so whether it's sponsorships like here, Microsoft has not sponsored this conference since 2000. We don't intend for that gap to appear again. I look forward to continuing to come back to the conference on an annual basis going forward, as we have with other significant conferences around the world as well. We're happy to continue to submit talks to conferences, to put people on airplanes, to participate in the conferences. We think that's an important part of being a responsible member of the community. We actually run our own podcast called Path to CitusCon, which you can listen to. We're watching the subscribers consistently tick up there. And we've been able to feature some pretty preeminent people from the community who have joined us to talk about, in some cases, simply their experience with Postgres and how they got started. And I know we've made a few contributions to PG SQL Friday as well along the way. I want to close by talking about some significant events and ways that we're also thinking about evangelizing more of the work that we're doing. First of all, here. We've got a great team from Microsoft who are at the conference. The booth's out on the right-hand side there. We've got 9 people, both based in India and who have flown in for the event. We've got a series of talks set up here while we're here. There was a training day given yesterday talking about AI and building these applications. I stepped in, it looked like a really engaging event. Alexander's going to be talking about PG upgrade. Yelta's going to be talking about load balancing. And then Varun's going to be talking about the data API builder on top of Postgres as well. So hopefully you can make it to some of those talks also. At Build, which is one of Microsoft's premier conferences for the year, we anticipate on making Postgres announcements. The date for Build has been announced. It's an in-person and hybrid event, so really easy to join remotely and listen to what we're making or talking about. I expect that you'll hear more from us with respect to Postgres at that event. And Microsoft also hosts and runs its own Postgres community event. It's free and online. The dates are June 11th to 13, which we didn't have when I talked at PGConf EU. And we've rebranded this year, formerly CitusCon, which actually Bruce referred to as well. We've renamed it to POSET. POSET stands for Postgres Open Source Ecosystem, Talks, Training, and Education. It's intended to be all-encompassing of the Postgres platform, whether it's extensions, whether it's applications, whether it's the core database itself. The CFP is open. We've already had some pretty significant demand. If anyone would like to submit talks, we would encourage you to. We have a talk selection committee that evaluates everything coming in. And we're hoping it's going to be a fantastic event. All of the content goes online subsequently afterwards, unless it's a talk that you would prefer us not to publish online. Path to CitusCon, which I think we will subsequently rebrand more in line with POSET, is something that we push about monthly. So we run about 12 a year. And something that you can simply listen into. We're always looking for people who might want to join and talk about like their experience or what they're working on. Claire Giordano and my team runs this and co-hosts it with Pino, who's one of our engineers. So it's yet another way that we're trying to tell people what we're doing and providing a platform for the community to talk about what you're doing as well. And finally, we would love a little bit of feedback. We've got a world-class room here of Postgres developers who I'm sure have a few opinions on Postgres. So we would selfishly like to ask for a couple of minutes of your help as well. There's a short survey here. It's got about 6 questions. They're multi-choice. I went through it last night. It doesn't take 2 minutes. It takes about 45 seconds. If you do it or if you don't do it, we have a huge amount of socks on the Microsoft booth at the end. So even if you don't do it, please come take the socks. I don't want to take all the socks back to the United States with me. And aside from that, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope to see you out on the floor in some of the events. Thank you very much.